Chapter 20. Dogs are foragers by nature. Faith wrote on the day's post for Have a Little. Faith. They evolved from canines who scavenged for food in the early settlements. For this reason, dogs will often eat anything they sniff out, whether that be delicious or rotten food, crumbs on the kitchen floor, dryer sheets, or even poison. Gulping down a white mocha she picked up from Starbucks on the way home, Faith gazed out over Carter's backyard. His house backed a few acres of forest. The towering trees provided shade and protection from the dusting rainstorm that had blanketed the city the last few days. She hadn't talked to Carter much since Paisley had shown up. He'd made it sound like they were long over, with no hope of getting back together from either side. But he'd been mistaken. Or he'd lied so Faith wouldn't know the truth. It was clear Paisley still had feelings for Carter, sexual, sleazy, or otherwise. How could Faith compare to the flawless blonde bombshell? If the woman really turned on the charm, or if Faith wasn't in the next room over, she couldn't compare. Simple as that. She had absolutely no right to be jealous. None at all. But jealousy didn't listen to reason. Rain pattered against the windows, dragging Faith back to her computer. Men are the same as dogs, they truly are. She typed away, talking as she went. When they hit a sexual drought, they'll bark up any skirt. Doesn't matter if that skirt is on a bimbo, ex-girlfriend, wife of a colleague, or all three rolled into one slutty ball. She deleted the last few lines, though she would have killed to keep them. Instead she wrote, "Because of their inherent scavenging nature, dogs, not men, we need to teach our pets what is good to eat and when to leave something bad or poisonous alone. Today our topic is teaching your dog the leave it alone command. Oh, if men could train as easily." She continued to type, "Your command can be drop it, leave it, or away. Whichever suits you. How about, keep your hands off the blonde tramp?" She laughed as her thoughts dashed to buying Carter a shock collar. Yeah, that'd work on Carter just fine. What would work on me? He said from the doorway. Her heart raced and she looked up. You scared me. I thought you'd left for work already. I'm staying late again tonight, so I don't have to go in until noon. He sat in the leather chair across from her. What are you working on? How to teach dogs to leave things alone. He kicked up his feet on the desk and crossed them at the ankles. So how do you do it? Are you really interested, or really bored? Both. He laughed. To be honest, I can see how much work you've been putting into this blog thing, and I'd like to hear more about it. This blog thing. As if writing a dog blog was a geeky adolescent phase that she'd suddenly recover from. Should she tell him now or later that the ads she'd placed on the sidebar had made her almost $1,000 since she'd put them up? She hadn't met with Mr. Winchester to hear his proposal yet either, though they'd set up a rendezvous next week, the afternoon after the bureau dinner. Well, she said, talking as she typed, you need two kinds of biscuits. One kind should be dry and bland, something the dog wouldn't really desire but would eat if there wasn't anything else available. The other kind of biscuit should be bacon-flavored and juicy, something the dog would naturally enjoy. Carter nodded, pretending to follow along, but he was probably bored out of his gourd. Put the dry biscuit on the floor, she said, and the dog will go after it. You'll want to cover it with something heavy, your shoe being the best option. Because the dog is a scavenger, it will fight to get the biscuit from beneath your foot. It'll probably cry and beg, paw and scratch, but eventually when it realizes it can't get what it wants, it'll back off. That's when you offer the juicy biscuit. The poor dog, Carter said. You're just teasing it with the dry biscuit. Faith looked up from her computer screen. No, it doesn't really want the dry one at all. How do you know? His brow looked puzzled. Maybe the dog prefers dry biscuits over bacon flavored. The dog only thinks it wants the dry biscuit because it doesn't think it can get a better one. They're opportunistic feeders. Carter slid his feet off the desk and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Things must have been getting heavy. He had his serious stone-set face on. What happens after you tease the pooch? Rolling her eyes, Faith continued. You reward the back off or leave it behavior. You give the dog the bacon biscuit and say the keyword you've chosen, whether it's off or away or leave it. The first time you'll say the word during the act, or slightly afterward. After this you'll say the command and expect compliance. You'll continue to do the routine 10 to 15 times or until the dog's behavior leans solidly toward waiting for the bacon biscuit rather than scrambling for the one it shouldn't eat. This bullshit really works. Carter laughed. You're torturing the poor dog. Who knows what he wants? Why not just give him the dry one? Because, once again, the only reason he was interested in the first place was because it was in front of him, not because it's what he prefers. What if the dog is tired of bacon biscuits? What if he's had them over and over again and wants something different? Carter's smile fell and an odd shadow crossed his face. What if the dog realizes too late what's best for him? What then? Carter, are you all right? He seemed to snap out of some kind of daze. I'm fine. I just think you're torturing the dog for no reason. If he wants the dry biscuit, let him have it. She sipped on her drink. That's not the point of the exercise. It's how to teach dogs to leave things alone. Other species of animals could use similar training. Take that, Casanova. So that's it then, he said. Torment the animal and move on? No. She shook her head and took another drink. You move the exercise to the park or on his next walk. You increase the temptation and remove the shoe. Over it. You leave something on the sidewalk that the dog really wants, so when you go for your morning walk, you say the word you've been using to keep the dog under control. He seemed to chew over her words. Humperdinck's improving. I've been meaning to tell you. I can walk by him now without his tiny fluffy legs attaching to the toe of my boot. Are you using the biscuit strategy to teach him to leave my shoes alone? Partly. She grinned. Humperdinck and I have a lot of work to do. He frowned. Why do you say it like that? Like what? That you both have a lot of work to do. Both. She shrugged. I'd like to be a juicy biscuit to someone someday. You. He cleared his throat and pounded on his chest as if something was stuck. I think you're juicy enough. Her cheeks flushed hot. His gaze shifted to the back lawn, the desk, the floor. I have to hit the gym before heading to work. Okay, she said, but he'd already scampered out of the office. He just said she was juicy. Was he toying with her, flirting as he always did? Or did he mean it? Stupid. She slammed her head on her desk. If he meant it, he would have stayed in their bed in the Monarch. He would have made a move before now. She'd been sleeping 2 doors down from him for the last 3 weeks, for Christ's sake. Now that she thought about it, why wasn't he trying harder to get into her pants? He wasn't the alpha of their wolf pack, but he exhibited serious alpha qualities. He was possessive and rugged, powerful and strong, and he'd made only 2 attempts to get her between the sheets. The first time he told her he didn't want her, and the next he'd run to the bathroom like his balls were on fire. Even the dog she'd trained would paw after a dry biscuit if it sat in the room next to them for weeks on end. She didn't exactly want Carter to paw at her. Okay, she totally did. But it'd be nice to turn down his advances rather than wonder why they weren't there in the first place. She's not like us. Paisley's words ran through her head. She's not confident in her sexuality and her ability to keep a partner happy. I'm the dry biscuit, she whispered to herself. Wonderful reality check. Thank you very much, Barbie Paisley. Luckily, there were options to change her bland biscuit status, and Paisley would lack class forever. And she really did want to be someone's juicy biscuit someday. She would have given her right arm to be Carter's juicy biscuit, but it looked like that wasn't in the stars anymore. She could exercise at home when Carter was at work. There had to be dancing videos available. Was Paula Abdul still around? The Tabo guy? Jane Fonda? God, had it really been that long since she'd worked out? She pulled up Amazon on the internet and punched fun, sexy physical fitness into the search bar. Zumba, pole dancing, portable pole included. An extensive 12-week program called Intensity D60Z. Things in the fitness world had really changed. There were so many options. So many things that looked surprisingly fun. I'll show you, confident. She tossed her mocha into the trash. I'll be the juiciest bacon biscuit in the Pacific Northwest. Chapter 21. What's taking you so long, Faith? Carter tightened his bow tie in the bathroom mirror and brushed a piece of lint off the lapel of his penguin suit. It's nearly 6 o'clock. They'll be here any minute. Are you ready? The captain and the other members of the bureau were never late. I told you I'm coming. He charged through the living room into the kitchen. She'd put dinner in the oven, chicken casseroles from the smell of them, bread on the counter, and dessert in the fridge. He checked all of those things twice to make sure Everything was ready to roll. He arranged a line of wine glasses that were already perfectly straight and twisted a few wine bottles so their labels pointed out. Something bumped against his shoe. Damn it, Humper. The black and white furball sat beside his shoe, staring up at him, his tiny tongue lolling out of his mouth. Look at that, you're not humping. He picked up the pooch and gave him a good scratch under the neck. You're kind of cute when you aren't acting like a freak. Some could say the same about you. He turned and lost his breath. Faith stood in the doorway wearing a 1950s-style emerald green dress that reached mid-calf. The dress was simple. Satin. Thick straps. It accented her curves perfectly, hugging her body at the waist, flaring at the hips with twisty-turvy fabric bunched at her breasts. Whoever designed the cocktail dress was a genius. As his gaze rose to her face, he bit back a gasp. Your hair, it's red. Although most of it was pulled up, she bounced a thick crimson curl in the palm of her hand, acting the part of a 50s starlet. Crazy, right? Haven't gone back to my natural color in years. He couldn't breathe. He set Humperdinck down and flipped the switch on the vent above the stove to make sure it wasn't sucking air from the room. What made you choose tonight to do it? He asked, when everyone would be staring at her. I realized I was tired of trying to be someone else, of trying to impress someone else when the only person who really matters is me. She smiled, lighting the room. And I like my hair red best. He absolutely agreed. You look stunning. Worth every hour you made me wait. He closed the distance between them, stopping just short of pressing against her. Did I ever tell you that when I was growing up my favorite cartoon character was Jessica Rabbit? No, she looked up at him, laughter and curiosity in her eyes. You didn't. That's what I was going to tell you at the Monarch during our shots game of Star Trek. He slid his hand along the natural bend of her waist. You always had the curves, but now with the hair. He blew out an exaggerated Roger Rabbit whistle. You're a spittin' image. She whacked his hand away. No touchy-feely for you tonight, Casanova. At least not until the bureau gets here. His heart sped and Carter got the unmistakable feeling that its rhythm was matching hers. You are still my wife, remember? As Faith scurried around making last-minute adjustments, Carter escaped to the restroom to catch his breath. The longer he was around her, the harder it was to keep his composure. His hands wanted to reach out for her. His mouth yearned to cover hers. His feet moved to be near her. It was as if the wolf part of him, somehow linked to the physical part, was determined to be with Faith no matter what the logical part of him said. He'd been spending long hours at the bureau to lessen the pull, but it wasn't working. He'd reopened cold cases, reworked details. He'd cleaned the break room. He'd organized filing cabinets and color-coded their werewolf registration system again and again, simply so he would stay busy and away from home until after Faith went to sleep. Over the last week they'd seen each other 30 minutes a day, an hour tops. Each time it was in passing, and each time she seemed to get more beautiful. It wasn't the few pounds she was shedding that had caught his eye. He'd noticed the exercise videos piled next to the television and moved into new positions by morning. It was the confidence she exuded. It reminded him of the first bureau dinner when Tracy glammed her up and she said she was determined to put on a show. Only this time he could tell the confidence was real. It was more than the clothes or the makeup and hair. It went deep and it was damn sexy. The doorbell rang. Before he exited the bathroom, Carter took a deep breath. Under the watchful eye of the bureau was the only time he could palm the small of Faith's back to lead her into a room. The only time when he could hold her hand at dinner. He could stare at her from across the room and admire how beautiful she looked. He might even be able to whisper it in her ear. It's showtime, he said, and then walked out to greet the captain. Faith felt great, better than she had in ages, and the party was a hit. The soreness from the intensity workout had finally worn off yesterday. She could sit now without moaning and falling onto her hip. For the first time since she'd met the members of the bureau, Faith felt like she could talk to them, as if they were somehow equal to her. Perhaps deep down beneath the badges and stuffy humor they were. Carter spent the first 20 minutes of the party on the back deck with the captain. Other bureau members and their partners had arrived, some familiar faces from Vancouver Island, including a few new others. Nate Ramsey arrived Solo, thank goodness, and apologized that Paisley wouldn't be attending. Apparently she'd eaten some bad fish from the market and was under the weather. Poor thing. Faith focused on the floor. Man, could it use a good waxing so no one would see her smile. As she served a full glass of wine to Mrs. Owens, who smiled and thanked her like a fellow Stepford wife should, Carter swept through the double doors, bringing in gusts of wind with him. Weaving around bureau members, Carter locked his gaze on hers. For a second, she thought she'd done something wrong. He embodied heat, raw and intense as he patted someone on the shoulder and brushed by, holding her captive with those icy blue eyes. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, walking straight past her and into the living room. "Sure." She smiled and set down the serving tray, nodding to Mrs. Owens. "I'll be right back. Take your time, dear." The living room was warm, thanks to the fire lit in the stone hearth in the corner, but Faith got an odd chill when she walked behind Carter. He faced the fire, his hands gouging into the spine of the couch, as if taking a silent cue. The few bureau members in the living room disappeared into the kitchen. Once they were alone, Faith touched his back. "Are you all right? What happened?" Carter spun around and pushed her back against the wall. She squealed, giddy with excitement, as he smiled and cupped her chin in his hands. "We did it," he said, his goofy grin reaching ear to ear. "Did what?" He brushed his cheek against hers and whispered, "The captain offered me the position." "He did," she screamed. "That's—" He silenced her with a kiss, melting her thoughts to goo. His lips pulled into a smile over her mouth. She smiled right back. A teeny tiny and very annoying voice in the back of her head screeched about not kissing her husband, but he got the job. This called for a celebratory kiss, and just one couldn't hurt. "He wants to petition the Alpha to open another spot for Nate," he whispered. "But for now it's only me." He palmed the wall on either side of her head, his hips pressed against hers. "He told me not to tell anyone, but I couldn't go another second without telling you." "I'm glad you did." Why was she suddenly out of breath? "So what now?" "There's a promotional ceremony in Wallace Falls State Park during the next full moon, with guests attending in wolf form, pack tradition. The Alpha and his family will be there, along with the existing members of the Bureau and anyone else from the pack who is interested in attending." He looked like he was about to burst out of his skin. "The captain said he noticed how many hours I've been clocking in at the office lately." "Yeah," she said. "You've been working nonstop." Keeping one hand on the wall above her head, he placed the other on her stomach. She quivered down deep in her belly as she looked up at him and anticipated the feel of his mouth over hers. He stared down at her through his thick lashes, blinking slowly. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with reverence. "You really pulled this off. I don't know what I'd do without you. Probably live a miserable, lonely existence." She joked, though he didn't laugh when she did. "You have no idea how right you are." Before she knew what happened, his lips touched hers, a caress that scattered goosebumps over her entire body. He was tender and careful, his lips urging hers apart without any demand. She pressed her hands against his chest and opened her mouth for him, but he didn't take the offer. He kissed her again and again, open-mouthed and full of affection. His fingers tangled in her hair, traipsed down her neck. Between the last time she kissed him and now, something changed. She couldn't pinpoint it, but she felt the shift rooted in her belly. He wasn't lusting after her body. She got the very real, very startling feeling that he was trying to connect with her on a much more intimate level. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. He seemed to be having as difficult a time finding air as she was. "How can this fade?" His voice was deep and raspy, barely audible. "He has to be mistaken." "What?" She frowned. "Who? I don't understand." "Ahem," someone said from the entry beside them. "Hate to intrude, but the oven timer's been going off for 2 minutes and no one can figure out how to turn it off." "Got it," Faith said, dropping her hands from Carter's abs. "Can you, she said to Carter, check on Humperdinck? He's been quiet." He nodded, and then disappeared into the hallway as Faith served dinner. When he returned to the dining room, they started on the casseroles. They were culinary perfection. Watch out, Rachel Ray. The dessert, chocolate souffle, scooped into individual cups, was a total hit. Two bureau wives asked for the recipe after scarfing them down, which Faith handed over in exchange for a few of their own tried-and-true recipes. After dinner, bureau members laughed and chatted in the living room, kitchen, and dining room. Nate and the captain spent over an hour in the study, probably talking about bureau business. Faith stayed in her heels as long as she could, but when midnight rolled around she tossed them beside the couch and slipped on her bumblebee slippers. Carter was on cloud nine, buzzing from one group to another. They seemed to accept him into their fray, patting him on the shoulder, smiling when he said something funny and shaking his hand. She'd never seen him this happy. Everybody was getting what they wanted from this marriage deal, Faith thought. Carter had landed the job of his dreams, Dawson was going to Yale, and what was she getting again? Oh yeah, she was getting a fake marriage to the guy of her dreams and a quickie divorce. She'd almost forgotten. As the unevenness of the picture became clear, a dull ache settled in Faith's chest. Chapter 24. It had been 1 month since Faith moved out. For long cold weeks, the guest room was empty, the fridge was bare, and a certain excitable furball was missing from the toe of his boot. Since Faith had moved in, Carter had gotten used to those things. He missed the warmth she brought to his home, the laughter and light, and if he allowed himself to admit it, he missed seeing the big brown eyes of that humping pooch too. The place even smelled like her, sweet and familiar, stirring something deep in his chest. Letting his cream of wheat get cold, Carter stared over his back lawn. He'd pinned her against a tree not far from there. Groaning, he leaned back in his chair. Does everything have to revolve around her? Getting Faith out of his mind was going to be harder than he thought. He'd buried himself in work the last month, but it didn't seem to help. He'd cleared out his desk and moved into his new office, but she was everywhere, in everything. He'd thought about Faith and the way she brought him Chinese when he worked late, and when he came home to an empty house, he half expected a plate to be waiting for him in the fridge. He tapped the invitation for the promotion ceremony against the table and pinched his lip with his forefinger and thumb. The ceremony was tonight. He'd be promoted to detective, the rank he dreamed about for more years than he cared to think about. Somehow along the way his goal had gotten muddled. Before he married Faith, he wouldn't have minded if she had plans and couldn't make it to see him be promoted to detective. But now she was the only person he truly wanted. Watching. The doorbell rang, and he couldn't help but wonder if it was her. Heart in his throat, Carter shuffled to the door and swung it open wide. Jameson Clark, the werewolf's version of a polygamist, stood in front of him, holding 2 cups of coffee. You look like shit, he said. Can I come in? Carter didn't budge. What are you doing here? I thought about what you said when you ambushed me at my house. Thought about it a lot. After you left, I did some research of my own. Think you might be interested in hearing what I found. How'd you find me? Carter fought through the numbness tingling his brain. How do you know where I live? You're not the only one who can dig around on the internet. Jameson bumped into his shoulder as he pushed his way into the foyer. Jesus, it's freezing in here. Why don't you turn on the damn heater? He hadn't thought about it, though it had been unusually cold lately. Here, take this. Jameson handed him one of the cups. It's black and should warm you up. Thanks. Make yourself at home. I will. He slouched into one of the couches and rested his ankle on his opposite knee. Where's your lady? We reached our natural and expected end. That was all he could muster. That's unfortunate. Jameson sipped on his drink. Cause of death. Carter sat on the couch opposite Jameson and stared into his eerie green eyes. The werewolf was ancient, yet his eyes were full of youth and boyish enthusiasm. Absent-mindedly, Carter wondered if that had something to do with the number of luminaries he'd found in his life. I can't be with someone I can't trust, Carter answered flatly. But if you don't mind, I'd rather not dredge up our issues. What's this research you wanted to tell me about? You have the promotion ceremony tonight, correct? How do you know about that? The Seattle Wolfpack online newsletter. You made front page. I should congratulate you on your new position. A cold chill seeped into his bones, freezing him from the inside out. He didn't want to sit here and chit-chat with a stranger about Faith, their marriage, their fallout, or his promotion. He didn't want to think about it at all, actually. Thanks, but if you don't mind, I have some things to get to today before the Ceremony. Carter waved his hand over his drink, trying to prompt some kind of answer. The research. The reason for your visit. I'm not the only man to have found multiple luminaries. Jameson took another drink and then licked foam off his lip. If you go back far enough into Seattle Wolfpack records, you'll find a handful of cases like ours. Cases where the mates died and the ones left roaming alone eventually found another. Carter cleared his throat. I'm not challenging your past anymore. I believe that you found 3 mates because I found a second. But what does that matter to you? Why come all this way to prove a point? Because I told you that the bond with my first luminary was the strongest, that the others faded after that. There are others who reported falling deeper in love with each subsequent mate. Wait. Carter slowed down the words so he could grasp them. It's possible for the luminary bond to strengthen. Jameson nodded and moved to the cushion to Carter. I didn't want you to go on thinking you'd never love as fiercely as you did with your first luminary. I didn't want my experiences to taint your decisions with your new wife. Although from the looks of your empty house, the bond with this wife can't be as strong as the first. Actually, you're wrong, Carter said. What I experienced with Faith was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. The love for my first wife was incredible, but it paled to what I feel for Faith. Jameson's gray brows pulled together. Then why'd you split? We were never going to work. Carter cleared his throat. It wasn't in the stars. How do you figure? His chest constricted. We didn't marry out of love. We were friends who decided to marry to get something out of it. I needed to have a mate to get the promotion, and she needed money to put her brother through school. I didn't know she was my luminary until after we were intimate. He expected Jameson to be shocked, to ask a ton of questions, to chastise him for going to such extreme lengths to advance his career. The fact that you didn't recognize her is irrelevant, Jameson said, putting a reassuring hand on Carter's shoulder. The pull to fated mates varies, depending on age, the strength of your spirit, your position in the pack, and circumstance. Whether it took you 1 touch or 20 to feel the spark, it doesn't change the facts. You're fated to be together and you can't fight fate. Carter shook his head. I drove my first wife away and into the arms of another man, many other men actually. I'll do the same to Faith. All it took was one incident, one miscommunication, and I acted like the same fool I was back then. I care for her and I want her in my life. If we stay married, that won't happen. I'll ruin our friendship because of my issues. I can't trust her, and if I can't trust her, I can't be close to her, at least not the way I want to be. I see. Jameson stared at his clasped hands for a long while before answering. You trust her, but you don't trust yourself. That's not what I said at all. Are you even listening? It sounds like you didn't like the person you were with, your ex-wife. He stared at Jameson. How could the man possibly know that? He was right. Right. He'd been controlling, overly possessive. He'd been a real jerk. Someone he never wanted to be again. Jameson nodded as if he could hear the thoughts swirling through Carter's head. You're more worried about falling into the same routine with your new wife than you are about mistrusting her. God, could he be right? He did trust Faith. It was the root of the reason he'd asked her to marry him in the first place. All you have to ask yourself, Jameson said, is whether she's done anything to make you mistrust her. She hasn't, Carter fired. And deep down, I don't think she ever would. She loves you. Carter nodded. He knew how she felt about him without her saying the words. Realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. If he kept trudging down this path, he'd be in the exact same place he'd been before. He'd be alone, filling a void in his heart with mindless dates and ditzy women who didn't mean anything to him. He'd worked so hard to avoid any kind of emotional attachment, he hadn't realized that he'd created a relationship with Faith. Even before they were married, he loved having her in his life. He needed her. He didn't want to lose her over something as stupid as his trust issues, especially if there was a chance that their bond could be stronger than the first he'd experienced. Deep in his gut, hard knots of anxiety bounced around like balls in a pinball machine. He longed to be with Faith, to protect her and care for her like no one had before. He wanted to watch sunsets from the swing on his back porch. He wanted to run as wolves through the forest after dinner, and then curl up in front of the fire and make love. More than all that, he wanted to grow old with her. And she wanted all of that too. He felt her love for him so deeply it hurt. I think I've ruined everything, he said as the fear set in. It might be too late. When it comes to true love, it's never too late. Jameson handed Carter his phone. Invite her to your ceremony tonight. Carter smiled as a plan came to light. No, I have a better idea. Chapter 25. Faith spun the note in her hand and read it for the 100th time. I'm taking you out. After what happened with Carter, you could use a break. Dress warm. I'll pick you up at 8. Tracy. Sighing, Faith shoved her arms into her coat and shot a sideways glance at the clock. 8 on the nose. She really didn't feel like going out. Cuddling up with a fuzzy blanket and carton of Chunky Monkey sounded much better. A car honked from the driveway. Gotta go, boy. She gave Humperdinck's back a loving scratch. I'll be back in a few hours. He gazed up at her, his honey brown eyes filled with warmth. We're going to be okay, you and me, she said, fully aware she was talking to herself as much as the dog. Everything's going to be all right. Better than all right. She'd had a rough few weeks, struggling to get Carter out of her head. They should have never gotten married. Maybe then he'd still be in her life, texting her suggestions for their movie night on Friday. No, she said aloud. That wouldn't have worked for long. She would have gone crazy watching him date woman after woman and then listening to him talk about why those relationships weren't working. She would have wanted more eventually. She would have made a move. She would have wanted to be with him the way she did now. At least she was stable. In the future, she wouldn't need to do something crazy like freaking marry someone to be able to support her brother, her only family. Her blog was now a full-fledged, up-and-running website. Have a little. Faith had gotten a major facelift. Comments and views reached heights she never could have dreamed. She'd even received an email about adopting Humperdinck. The man was from Portland, sounded sincere, like he loved animals, and wanted to surprise his wife with the dog she'd always wanted. After she returned tonight, she'd reply to his email and arrange a meeting. The car honked a second time. She locked up her front door and spun around, covering her mouth with her hand. A limo was parked in the driveway and a man dressed in a tuxedo held the rear door open. Miss Griffin? He asked flatly. Yes. This couldn't be right. Why would Tracy send a limo? Tracy asked me to deliver a message. She says she'll meet you at your destination. She walked down the porch, the sound of her boots striking wood echoing through the forest. And where would that be? I'm not obliged to say just yet. I see. Hesitantly, she slid into the limo. Are we? He shut the door before she could finish, and left the glass wall between them. Locked in the up position, she settled in for the drive, gazing out the tinted windows as the city swept by them. An hour later, she guzzled the water in the console, eaten the nuts in the complimentary mini bags, and had knocked on the security glass until her hands hurt. Where the hell was Tracy taking her? As they pulled off the road near a sign that read "Welcome to Wallace Falls State Park," Faith sat back, searching for signs of her friend. Instead, car after car lined the road and filled a large parking lot. A couple strode by them hand in hand. She didn't need the windows down to pick up the scent. The vents allowed enough air into the cab. There were werewolves here. Lots of them. Realization hit the promotion ceremony. The car stopped and the driver walked around the hood to open her door. This way, ma'am, he said. What the hell was going on? Tracy was oblivious to the workings of the Seattle wolf pack. She wouldn't have wanted to bring Faith here, among a bunch of wolves, to the pack's promotion ceremony. Son of a... She pulled herself out of her bag to call Tracy the conniving snot. She must have talked to Carter and arranged for her to be brought here to watch him get promoted. No bars, no service. She put her hands on her hips. Can't believe she did this behind my back. Ma'am, the driver asked. Is Tracy seriously meeting me here? No, ma'am. Smirking, the driver pointed to a dirt path lined with roping white lights. But you have someone waiting for you that way. Yeah, that someone was Carter. Had to be. Her stomach turned at the thought of seeing him. She could be strong and independent, stand on her own 2 feet and face the future alone, as long as she didn't meet those dreamy eyes of his. One look in them and she seemed to lose herself. On second thought, when she was with him, she felt more like herself than she had with anyone else. He brought out the best in her. A month with him and she had become the woman she'd always wanted to be. Why would he bring her here? Did he think she would have declined if he'd come right out and asked? She probably would have, which meant he knew her stubborn streak well, but still. He was her friend and this night meant a lot to him, which meant it was special for her too. Before she could think about what that meant, she crossed the tree line and strode into the forest where streams of moonlight broke the canopy over her head. Mrs. Owens appeared from around a tree, startling her. "Glad you could make it, sweetheart," she said, reaching out to hold Faith's hand. "This is such a huge moment for your husband." "Yes, it is, isn't it?" Oh, how flippin' wonderful, he hadn't told them. He was planning on going through with the ceremony, earning the position he'd clawed for, fong and nail. To hell with how awkward this might have been for her, right? Class A jerk. "You know what," Faith said. "I left my coat in the car." She turned back, but Mrs. Owens caught her arm. "We'll be in wolf form soon." "Enough, my dear. To witness the ceremony, you have to shift first." Faith got the drift. With a coat of fur she wouldn't be cold. Mrs. Owens took her by the arm and led her down the dimly lit path. "There is a large turnout tonight," she said, winding through the tress. "Over 50 packmates arrived. Carter is still meeting with the captain, but as soon as they're finished negotiating his pay and other details of the position, the ceremony will begin." Yeah, that sounded fair, Negotiate a hefty paycheck while Faith stood out in the cold and acted like nothing had happened between them. When would he tell them she moved out? She wondered. Probably not until long after he'd secured his position. Faith smiled and patted Mrs. Owens's arm, playing the part of a doting wife. "I'm so proud of him. He's worked so hard for this." Her stomach panged as she realized she spoke the truth. She was proud of him. He had worked hard for this job, giving up his mornings, evenings, and weekends. He'd kept his eye on his goal, and had never wavered, not once. His determination was admirable. As the path ended at a giant clearing, Faith sucked in a short breath. Red, white, and black roses were everywhere, littering the floor in giant stands, beside a stone altar, in vases on a dozen tables. "Breathtaking, isn't it?" Mrs. Owens crooned. "Veronica Vale Black event. Planning took care of the details. She's just amazing. Oh, there she is over there." She pointed to a thin, wispy little thing in a lacy black dress, arranging a floral arrangement on a nearby table. "She's newly transitioned. Married to our Alpha's head of security, Logan Black. Looks like he and the Alpha have some unfinished business. Hope nothing's wrong with security for tonight's ceremony." Faith followed her line of sight. Logan and Drake, Seattle Wolfpack's Alpha, talked near the altar, leaning over its stone top. They weren't the only two werewolves in the clearing with unfinished business. Once she got hold of Carter, she was going to... And there's Nate and his wife. Isn't she lovely? Mrs. Owens leaned close and whispered. "They just arrived minutes before you did. It's my understanding that our Alpha intends to open up a second position for Nate, as well. Caught wind that it'll happen sometime next year. I just can't get over how gorgeous she is." Faith bit her lip. Paisley was undeniably Sports Illustrated cover model material, but that was all right because Faith could cook and train dogs and start up an online business with nothing but her determination. She may not have been thin like Paisley, but she had curves and men loved them. Well, Carter seemed to enjoy them anyway, and Paisley may have had unblemished, milky white skin, but there was nothing unique about her. Nothing that showed the depth brewing beneath the surface. Faith drew her hair back over her shoulders, exposing the scar on her neck. The mark was a battle wound, one she'd wear with pride from here on out. She'd gone through hell and soul-staggering depression when she'd lost her parents. But she'd made it and come out on the other side stronger than before. "Yes," Faith agreed, holding her head high. "Paisley is absolutely stunning." Yet not for 1 second did Faith want to switch shoes with the floozy. Especially not while Paisley was wearing those fugly purple stiletto ankle rollers. "Ladies and gentlemen, Drake Wilder, the Alpha of the Seattle Wolfpack," announced from the altar. He dwarfed the stone, his 6-foot gigantic frame hovering over it. His hair was longer than when she'd seen it last, dark and slicked back, and his eyes were wide, nearly black. At his side, his wife, Amelia, smiled brightly. She looked amazing for having given birth to their third child, a boy named Russell Drake Wilder Jr., a few months before. "I received word from the captain that he and Mr. Griffin are ready for the promotion ceremony to begin." We will eat at the tables behind us promptly. After the ceremony, but first, the wolves must descend. Faith shivered as she watched the crowd shift in the moonlight. Wolves of all shapes and sizes shed their clothes as fur blanketed their bodies. They dropped to all fours, snouts elongating and muscles bulking up. Some were small and sleek, while others were burly and robust. Glancing at the waning moon, Faith brushed her hands over her arms and willed the moon's energy to whisper through her. Body humming, she let the urge to shift overtake her, balled all the energy swirling in her gut into a ball, and pushed outward. The shift from woman to wolf happened quickly, but not as quickly as others. Mrs. Owens was already in wolf form, her back covered in light fur that matched the color of her hair. She sat back on her haunches, arched her neck, and howled at the moon. The others followed, crying violently at the golden orb hanging low in the sky. They approached the altar, stalking side by side, providing little room for Faith to see the front. Drake stood taller than the rest, his fur midnight black and glossy. Proud members of the Seattle Wolf Pack, welcome. Their alpha spoke through the pack's process of mind speak. We have gathered together on this glorious night to witness a promotion in our pack. Carter Griffin, a tireless enforcer in our bureau, will become one of our distinct detectives. He vows to protect each and every one of you. Without further ado, I give you Mr. Carter Griffin. They cried out once more, their howls echoing in the night. Out of the corner of her eye, Faith spotted Carter, the ridge of his back high, his ice blue eyes a piercing contrast against his black fur. He approached the altar, faced the members of the pack in attendance, and then bowed his nose to the ground. I'm honored to be chosen for the position of detective within the bureau, he projected. But there's something I must confess before the ceremony goes any further. Faith's interest was piqued. She weaved through the crowd toward the altar. Contrary to what I've led the officials in the bureau believe, Faith Hamilton and I didn't marry for love, Carter said. She agreed to marry me so that I had a better shot at getting this position. The wolves in the crowd buzzed with shock. Mindspeak inundated Faith's thoughts until she couldn't hear her own. Carter scanned the faces in the crowd, and when his gaze landed on hers, her heart clenched. I understand the reasons that the Bureau desires its high-ranking officials to be mated, he continued, and for that reason I cannot accept the promotion. Nate Ramsey, the other candidate who is here tonight, should get the job. Under the circumstances, he's more deserving of the position than I am. Carter was going to hand the job over to Nate? Just like that? Why, she was playing the part. He could have easily gone along with the ruse, accepted the position, and moved on. They could have dealt with the ramifications of their divorce later. But there is more that needs to be said. An apology that needs to be heard. He projected loudly above the dissension of the crowd. His gaze gripped her. She couldn't look away no matter how she tried. Faith, what I said to you when we got in that big fight, I was right. That's not exactly the best way to apologize, she answered back. His mouth widened into an awkward smile. I didn't ask for you to take cooking classes, for the dog kennels to clutter the back lawn, or for Humperdinck to take such a liking to me. I didn't ask for you to exercise or entertain anyone. I was absolutely right. She titled her head and sked her tongue against the roof of her mouth. Not doing any better. I'm not finished. His voice reverberated through her head, rich and thick, drowning out every other thought in the pack. I didn't ask for your sweet scent to linger in my house, for you to pop into my head whenever I think of something funny to say. I didn't ask for you to make me laugh, to be the greatest lover I've ever had. I didn't ask for you to be my mate, though you are. Faith. You have to know what you are to me. You're everything, my best friend, my wife, my soul mate, and the very best part of me. As her throat squeezed, disbelief rooted in her mind. Carter hadn't said the exact words before, but he'd sweet-talked her a dozen times. She was dead tired of allowing him to use her emotions as his personal yo-yo. It was going to take something really extreme to make her open up and go back to him. If I can't be with you, none of this means anything. You're the reason I got the job. I don't want it without you. He stepped off the altar and pushed through the crowd. Hell, I don't want to live a single day without you at my side. He approached her, the crowd parting, staring, and when he reached her side, he burrowed his head against her neck. I love you, Faith. I love you more than I've ever loved another. You were in front of me the entire time, but I was too stupid and too blind to see you. You were and have always been the woman fated for me. She wobbled, her legs and will weakening together. And I know you love me too, even if you haven't said the words. His voice was soft, tender, a caress against the fur on her neck. I pray that you can find it in your heart to take me back. If you can't forgive me for being such an ass, I'll spend every single day of the rest of my life trying to convince you that we belong together. I don't know what to say. She cast her thoughts, struggling to hold back the emotion bubbling inside her. I know exactly what to say. Drake interrupted, standing behind the altar. The packmates went quiet. Carter, from what I've seen tonight, there is no reason why you have to sacrifice your position in the bureau. He lied. Nate Ramsey's thoughts hurled from the back of the crowd. How can you push him up the ranks if you can't trust him? Drake's dark gaze met Carter's. Because he revealed the truth to us now, when it meant the most. He could have taken the position and run with it, yet he didn't. He came forward in front of the members of the pack gathered tonight, and that takes courage. However, if Carter believes Nate is a worthier candidate, perhaps we should reconsider our stance to accept only one detective into our ranks. Nate, please come forward. He shouldered through the crowd and joined Drake at the front. Carter's captain stepped forward to address the crowd. Carter Griffin, you were up for this position once before and were turned down due to being in an unstable state. The captain eyed Faith carefully. Although you claim not to be married in heart to this woman, we can sense that you've made it. We sense your desire for her and hers for you. It's clear to see that the bond you share together has strengthened you. What I see beneath the moon tonight is a different man than the unstable one we met years ago, one who is determined to walk a path of honesty, integrity, and courage. We'd be happy to have such a werewolf promoted in our bureau. Thank you, Captain. Carter lowered his head as he faced their alpha. And humble thanks to you too, Mr. Wilder. Now if you take your places, we'll continue. Drake projected. Carter, join Nate at the altar. Carter turned to Faith. It's not worth a lick without you. Go. She nudged her nose against his. It's what you've always wanted. That may be, he projected softly. But it'd mean nothing without you. I said go, she whispered. We'll work on us after. His ears twitched. So there's still an us? You're still a contender, Brando. She giggled, but the sound came out as a half growl. Now go. Carter bounded happily onto the stage next to Drake and Nate. The two candidates faced the packmates and bowed. Then loudly and proudly they took turns reciting the vows that proclaimed them to be newly promoted high-ranking officials in the Wolfpack's Enforcement Bureau. The packmates went wild, howling and yelping at the moon. As Carter descended from the stage, he brushed against her, the warmth from his body radiating into hers. Her eyes fluttered closed and her heart gave a stutter. Things were going to be okay after all. Of course they are, he projected quietly. As long as we're together, everything's going to be perfect. There's one thing I have to ask though. Shoot. He lowered his head in front of hers, his ears folding down, his eyes fluttering closed. Whatever he was about to say was hard for him. Do you love me? He asked. I don't exactly know how to answer that. She pulled back and gazed into those heavenly blue eyes. You told me not to lie to you. Yes, he whispered into her thoughts. I did. So I'll tell you that what I feel for you is more than love and more than words. You consume me, and although I could live without you standing strong on my own 2 feet, you complement me in every way and make every experience I have more vibrant. I crave being near you so much that it pains me when we're part. He growled from deep within his chest and nuzzled against her. She could hear his heartbeat, could feel the warmth and strength of his body. Faith Elroy Hamilton, he said, I love you more than anyone has ever loved another. Make me the happiest werewolf on the planet and marry me. Again. Oh, Carter. The lips covering her incisors pulled back into a smile. That's the most romantic second proposal I've ever received. And then right there, in front of the packmates and high-ranking members of the Enforcement Bureau, they said their vows and sealed their fates together. Forever, for real this time. Epilogue. 2 days later, Dawson came to visit. Faith always loved when her younger brother stayed with her, and didn't want to think about life without him when he went away to Yale. It was a good thing she could cuddle up to Carter. He always seemed to make everything better. You're going to a good home, aren't you, boy? Dawson ran his fingers through Humperdinck's fur. Hey, Faith, what time is the adoptive parent coming again? Around noon. She curled into the corner of her couch, her legs tucked beneath her and a cup of coffee in her hand. You going to stay until he shows up? Maybe. Shrugging, he checked the clock. Or until Carter gets here. I don't want to leave you alone when a stranger comes knocking. That's nice of you. Who knew you could be so chivalrous? He grinned, giving Faith images of the little boy she used to know. It's the least I could do after what you've done for me. He scratched Humperdinck's back and kept his eyes on the floor. If I haven't thanked you before, thank you. I love you, dude. Her heart filled and overflowed. You don't ever have to say thank you. I would do anything to be able to pay your way through school. It's more than that. He looked up at her. Thank you for the bags of groceries every time I visit, for the late-night phone calls to make sure I've made it home okay, for caring. You're the best sister in the world. Humperdinck yapped as if he agreed. I think you're pretty great too. The next time you call me, it better be to say that you're killing it in your classes. Oh, I will. He checked the clock for the umpteenth time. Tracy's car pulled in front of the porch, the sound of her motor sending Humperdinck into a frenzy. Faith commanded him to stop. He listened, shutting his cute little hairy mouth. Dawson was at the door before Tracy opened it. Morning, Tracy, he said, his voice tighter than it had been moments before. Good to see you. Tracy grinned and then embraced Dawson in a hug. Good to see you too. They held each other a little longer than Faith expected, and when they pulled away, Faith could sense electricity in the air. Dawson's eyes lit up and he swiped his hands on his jeans. Care to say goodbye to Humperdinck before he's adopted out? Faith said, breaking their connection. Tracy freaked, flapping her arms against her sides. That's why I came by this morning. I couldn't let my favorite puppy leave without saying goodbye. The guy should be here in a few minutes. Get your last bits of loving in while you can. As Tracy swept Humperdinck into her arms, Faith sighed. She'd come a long way with the cute little guy and she'd miss him like crazy. But she'd already promised the man he could have the pooch, and she couldn't go back on her word, especially not now that she posted the updates on her blog. Every one of the 5,000 subscribers knew Humperdinck was being adopted today, and she promised to go on tonight and give a final blogging farewell to the pup, giving the final stats for his progress. He'd improved so much over the last months. It had been almost a week since her couch cushion had been mounted, days since she had to command him to leave it, hours since he glanced lovingly at her. Shoo. He was a work in progress just like her. Carter's here, Dawson said. I can now leave you in good hands. Okay, get out of here. Faith embraced her brother and friend as Humperdinck escaped onto the porch. Call me when you get back to school. Okay, Dawson said and squeezed her tight. I will. I'm going to go too. I don't want to watch the little guy drive away. Tracy traipsed down the porch, giving Carter a high five as he passed. Good to see you, Carter. He grinned, lightening Faith's mood instantly. With her husband at her side, she could handle saying goodbye to Humperdinck. Hell, she felt like she could handle anything. As he joined her on the porch, he coiled his arm around her waist. They watched Dawson and Tracy pull away together, and nothing had ever felt more right. You okay? He said once they were alone. Yeah. She laid her head against his chest and sighed. I will be. After remarrying in front of the pack, Carter and Faith had retreated to his place, their place, and completed the luminary bond, now finding a happy home. For Humperdinck was the final piece of the perfect puzzle. Going to be hard to let the little guy go? She looked down at him, tears welling in her eyes. Yeah. Good thing you won't have to. Yeah. She paused. Humperdinck bumped against her foot. Wait. His words sank in. What? He glanced down at her, the glimmer in his blue eyes heating her through. I'm adopting Humperdinck. Her brows scrunched as confusion set in. No, you can't. I've already told the guy from Portland that he could have him. Hi, he said, sticking out his hand. I'm from Portland and I'm interested in adopting the dog you mentioned on your blog. I have a new wife who loves teacup Yorkies and the one you featured is absolutely adorable. Think he'll be a perfect addition to our family. No. She smacked him as the blood drained from her face. Is that really you? You're joking, right? He scooped Humperdinck off the ground and stroked his tiny back. I've gotten attached to the little guy. I couldn't let you give him away. And even though You'd never say so. You didn't want to let him go either. You're right, I didn't. A tear rolled down her cheek. Thank you for caring. Enough to do something like that. He leaned down and kissed her, melting all her worries away. When he pulled back, his eyes were hooded with desire. Oh, I care a lot. More than you'd believe. What do you say we disappear into this cabin of yours so I can show you how deep my love goes? Humperdinck's gaze flipped back and forth between them. We should probably lock him in the kennel first, she said, rubbing his ears. Why's that? Dogs often mimic the behavior of their masters. Kinking an eyebrow, she smacked him in the rear. I wouldn't want to give him any frisky ideas. If that's the case, we're going to set him back in his training. Carter swept her into his arms and charged into the house. She squealed in delight as his arms wrapped protectively around her waist and his mouth caught hers in a smoldering kiss. Down, boy, she said. On command, Carter set her down, kicked off his shoes and stripped out of his pants. She smirked, watching the clothes fly off his body. Men could train as easily as dogs.